Musculonodular. Ask me why I move this way. This is what I tell them. My balance and my movement. Thanks to my cerebellum. Muscle doesn't want to move. It's going to compel them. My balance and my movement. Thanks to my cerebellum. Around the fourth ventricle. Please let me explain. Peduncles attach medulla oblongum in brain. Most soma into outer cortex are molded. Soma surface area because it's highly folded. Ask me why I move this way. This is what I tell them. My balance and my movement. Thanks to my cerebellum.
Okay, so you want to understand that song, so we should talk. there's more songs. So I'm not really a heavy metal performer, but this is as close as I've ever become. So I'll show you this one.
You will feel pain. You will feel pain.
So this one goes into all the ways that we feel pain, and I don't really do that many romantic songs, but here's like the most romantic song I ever wrote.
If you touch me, I will feel it.
And that goes into all the nerves and the spinal cord.
Me, my tactile cord.
Okay, so we can get back to that. But there's just so many songs on this material. Welcome, everybody. This is one of the most exciting topics, the human brain and behavior. Without bragging, humans often do, but without bragging, the human brain, what you have up here, is the most complex structure we know of in the universe. All right, there is nothing more intricate than what you have up here that we know of. So this is a fascinating topic. In addition, like this is me, kind of. Like this is my hand. Like it's me. But is it really? I mean, because like if I had a car accident on the way home, I lost my hand. I mean, I would hate that. All right, but if I did, who would I be? I'd be me. I just wouldn't have a hand. All right. If I lost my leg, same thing. If I had a hip replacement, if I didn't tell you, you would know. Like instead of my hip, I would have artificial stuff put in there. You wouldn't know. So like I could. I'm sorry. Did someone say something?
It's hard. It's almost sounds like you're stepped away from the presentation for people online.
Okay, so I put on something called Live Performance so you could hear the music. Now that's off. Can you hear me better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you for letting me know. All right, so I'm going to go back to, yeah, we are sharing. Yeah. Where did I go? I'm sorry, I lost myself. Where am I? Zoom, what did you do?
That's why we're studying the brain.
Yeah, you should study someone else's, not mine.
Who is Michelle?
Okay. Can everyone at home see the neurons there in the movie?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay. Like if I were to get a heart transplant, someone else's heart would be in my body, but I'd still be me. All right. If I could get a lung transplant, and if I could get a cornea from my cadaver, I'd still be me. So like these parts are me, but like I could live without them and you wouldn't even know. All right. You would say he's the same person. But if I fall down the steps and I hit my head, all right, some of you might say, since his accident, it's like he's a different person. All right. So this is the human body, but this is the part that matters. All right. So like if you damage this, you would not be here. That's why we don't talk about brain transplants. All right. If there was a brain transplant, someone else would be living in your body. All right. So even though all of this is the human body, this is the part that really matters. So today, a little explanation in like how it works. All right. Because we live here more than anywhere. Like somewhere in here, there are cells that remember your grandmother. There are cells that remember that traumatic event from the junior prom or whatever. These cells have a favorite color. Like, how do they do that? All right. Well, the brain and the nervous system made of a couple different kinds of cells, but the main ones are these. They're called neurons, and they do two big things. All right, which is good. They don't do that many because obviously we're doing a whole lot of material. Two big things. One, they conduct electricity. So they conduct electricity along their length. So if you start at one side and you want to get to the other, you conduct an electrical message. And the second thing, when cells touch another cell, they then have chemical messages which travel there. Okay. Now, there's different fancy types of these cells. I mean, these cells are like impressive. They could be big. So for example, if I stub my toe, there is a cell, one, that went from the tip of my toe, up my leg, hit my spinal cord, went up, and ended here. That's like a 6-foot long cell. All right. So like cells are often like microscopic, but these can be big enough to see without a microscope in some cases. So these are exciting cells. We don't have time, but if this were a beginning class, we would start naming all the parts. Like there's the dendrites, which sample the area for information, the soma, and this electrical activity goes on the axon. So electricity, that's good. All right. And the reason it's good is because if I touch my hand on a hot stove, I'm doing tissue damage. All right. And the longer it takes to get, my hand off, the more I've hurt myself. But if we can take an electrical message, which travels here, makes a decision on another electrical message, then this could, potentially travel very fast. And if you were to say, how is it that a cell can conduct electricity? Well, to be honest, in my A&P1 classes, this would take an hour to explain. But if I were to condense it into like 20 seconds, it would be when cells separate charge. So these little red things, these are charged ions of sodium. These little blue things are charged ions of potassium. When we separate charge, we create voltage. That's the definition of voltage. You separate charged particles. So if a cell membrane pumps, the red guys over here and the blue guys over here, they've separated charge. There is now a voltage difference, just like you have a voltage battery, all right, that has separated charge. And when the charges come back together, this flow of charged particles is the electricity that can do work. We've separated charge, which we can measure, minus 70 millivolts plus 30 millivolts. And under certain conditions, we can say, hey, I know under usual conditions, you red guys, you want to come in, but we won't let you. You blue guys, you want to leave, but we won't let you. But under certain conditions, hey, you know what? We'll open the red door. So red ions, you can come in. And as they do, there's this movement of charged particles. So you can actually see that. You can measure the electrical difference across the cell membrane. And a little later, we get the blue particles and we let them leave. So once again, this would take an hour to go into. That's not why we're here. But if anyone, was asking, how is it that cells can conduct electricity? That's the reason they open these doors for charged particles. Now, maybe you're not impressed because that one little spot, it changed its electric potential and then it went back to normal. But what happens is if we change this area, all right, it will go back to normal. But in the meantime, that changes this area and that will go back to normal. But that will then change this area, which changes this area, which changes this area. And that's why a message that, hey, you touched a hot stove is now this electrical message, which is getting to my spinal cord. And my spinal cord says, hey, stupid, take your hand off the hot stove. Then is an electrical message which goes back, right? So that's the key here, which allows me to have this big body because I can, send messages back and forth. Well, how quickly can I send these messages back and forth? Well, 2 miles an hour is a good starting point. But once again, if my hand's on the hot stove, I'm burning myself. So if I could speed it up, that would be great. So the ways that I speed it up is I make the axon, this part, fatter. And if I put these little wrappings on it, these myelin nodes, now the electricity can't go the entire length. It has to jump from space to space to space. And now I could actually make the message travel at like 280 miles an hour, right? So there are ways of speeding it up. Not all of our axons look like this. One, we wouldn't have enough room. If all of your nervous system had axons like this, a nerve would be as thick as a garden hose, and your spinal cord would be as thick as a garbage can. But secondly, let's just face it, not everything is urgent. Like let's say you had dinner, and right now your dinner is somewhere in your jejunum, and it's about to be, pushed to your ileum. Or do you say, hey, small intestine, could you push, my food a little farther? No. No, it's not urgent. All right. So that split second, you don't need it to go at 280 miles an hour, push my food forward or release sweat to cool down. Wait another millisecond. So we don't need fat myelinated neurons everywhere. Okay. Neurons do two things. Electricity travels along their length, but when they touch another cell. This is now where we need something else, because in general, electricity doesn't jump from cell to cell. So if that's a neuron with its electricity, we now need a chemical message, all right, to travel to, say, a muscle cell or another nerve cell. So where cells touch, we need chemical messages. Now, I want to talk about like behavior and personality. So, you know, my students are anxious to leave like the small cellular stuff. But I'd like to just kind of focus on this for a second, because so much of personality is wrapped up here, all right? So how does this work? Well, I'll tell you. And let's just, we don't have time for everything. Let's pick dopamine. We could do serotonin too, but let's do dopamine. Where did dopamine go? Oh, there we go. Okay. So in some of my cells where they touch each other, they release a signal called dopamine. So that cell number one tells cell number two, hey, I want you to do something, and here's my signal, dopamine. Now, before I get into this, if you just take a second and look at someone in the room other than me, go! People at home, that's your homework assignment. Okay. Obviously, we're different. Like you know, we have different genes for our hair, for our eyes, for our height, for our, you know, for everything. All right, so we're different. And when I tell you about this, we are different. Our genes for this stuff is different too. So if I'm going to send a dopamine signal, right, I have to make dopamine. So I have to take something that I ate for dinner, tyrosine, it's an amino acid, and I use this green enzyme to change it. And then I use another green enzyme to change it a little more, and now I've got dopamine. But the thing is, we vary. So the green enzyme, your version isn't the same as mine, just like your hair color gene isn't the same as mine, or your blood type gene. And people who have a variation in this has been linked to neuroticism, angry hostility, vulnerability, suicidal behavior, and vulnerability. So we need to make dopamine, and not all of us make it the same. Or at least the enzyme isn't identical in all of us. Are we done? No, because once we make it in neuron number one, it gets released across the space. So neuron number two needs to know it's there with a receptor. All right, you can release dopamine, but if you don't have a dopamine receptor, cell number two doesn't know it's there. So we have dopamine receptors. There are different kinds, and as you might guess, if you look around the room, we're different. We're different in this as well. So not everyone has the same dopamine DRD1 receptors or dopamine DRD2. Variations here are often linked to addiction. So there is no gene for addiction, all right? So if I have said this gene, all right, and I never try cocaine, I will never be addicted to cocaine. So there's no gene which will make me addicted to cocaine or alcohol, all right? But if you look at the people who are addicted to cocaine or alcohol, very often they, more often than not, have one version of this gene rather than another. So if you have a group of people try the same chemical substance, your odds of becoming addicted are influenced by, just like we have different hair color genes, which dopamine D2 receptor you have. Personal question, did anyone go on a roller coaster this weekend? No. Anyone go to a library? Okay. Well, part of the answer would be tied up in this. Some of us, we seek out adventure and adrenaline, like libraries are boring. I want to go on the roller coaster and bungee jumping. Some of us don't want to go bungee jumping and on the roller coaster. We prefer going to the library or a nature walk or whatever. And some of that is correlated by which version of the dopamine receptor D4 that you have. All right. Some of the receptors are hard to stimulate, so you need a lot more stimulus to feel pleasure. All right. While other people can feel pleasure from a smaller stimulus. So this is, oh, I'm sorry, and I'm not even done with dopamine. So we did dopamine, we made it, we perceived it, but now we got to break it down. And there are different genes which break it down, but we vary. So if we vary in monoamine oxidase 2 is the big gene. Then this can affect intelligence, this can affect autistic behavior, but it also can cause Brunner syndrome, in which males, but not females, will be horribly aggressive their entire lives and will be almost certainly incarcerated. Right? It's very rare, all right? But even in mice mutations in the exact same gene cause the same thing. Males are super aggressive and females aren't. And so we have to make it, we have to perceive it, we have to break it down. But look at us, we vary. So the genes which do the processes which I just said, they vary. This does not determine personality. So much of our personality is, how we grow up and our experiences, but it is a factor. There is a genetic, foundation with which we interact with our environment. And just like, our height, our hair color, et cetera, affect, aspects of our experience, so due to these genes. And this was just dopamine. We don't have time. You want to go on. We could do the same thing with serotonin. We make it, but the enzymes vary. We perceive it with lots of different receptors, but they vary. We break it down, et cetera. And there's other aspects as well. So even though most people want to leave the cellular aspect and go into, the bigger stuff, pharmaceuticals affect those. I mean, so if you're taking something, to fight depression, if you're taking something to treat addiction, it's neurons only do two things. They're conducting electricity and they talk to each other with these neurotransmitters. So the medications which we take to affect moods and drives, et cetera, they are most likely influencing some of those. So very important in pharmacology. Yeah.
The Brenner syndrome, is it associated with the XYY?
No. No. Yeah. So and actually XYY, we could argue about that. That's where most of us have two sex chromosomes, either XX or XY, but there are other possibilities and you can get a second Y chromosome. There has been a debate. As far as I know, I don't know that the debate was absolutely settled, but that individuals with XYY would be taller than average. They would be male, taller than average. But the question was, are they more likely to, be incarcerated? Now, some would argue that yes, and that would be tied to like, oh, if Y, contributes to maleness, maybe having two Ys would make sense that, there would be this extra risk. But having extra chromosomes can also affect other things like, cognition. And let's say if this is affecting, your cognitive abilities, maybe that limits you, and maybe that was a factor. There was other studies which said, they're more likely to, be in the system, but not for violence, more, that they were unable to, finish school or whatever. And last I checked, the debate wasn't we've settled. So that's just what so these neurons, they start getting bigger and they get to what's called the central nervous system and the spinal cord. And I just want to mention the spinal cord. The first thing we see with the spinal cord is it comes in colors. All right, there's white matter and there's gray matter, and the brain will have this as well. And the thing is, this is the most complex structure in the known universe. It has to be organized. So if you go to like your office or your room and you've got like a filing cabinet, you want organization. You just don't want papers everywhere, because if someone says, I need the water bill from March, did we pay it? If you just have a room full of papers, it's there, but you're getting it as a problem. But if you have like, oh, here's the filing cabinet, bills are over here, then there's a folder marked water bills. Now, the better you've stored it, the better you're likely to find what you need when you need it. So the big part of a nerve cell, the soma that has the little dendrites, that's going to be in the gray matter, while the axons there in the white matter. The axons are kind of like wires. I'm sorry, someone had a question, I think. All right, hi. When you step away, okay, I won't step away. Thank you for letting me know. We have gray matter versus white matter. If you were to look at the human spinal cord, you can see it. All right, it's been stained, but nevertheless, you can see there's different areas here. The soma, the big fat parts of the neurons, they're here in this H-like structure, whereas the axons, that's what's in the white matter here, okay? Not only is it organized gray versus white, but the gray matter is organized. So the gray matter that's on the back of me, that does sensory stuff like touching and pain, whereas the gray matter on the front of me, that does movement and giving commands. If I look at the white matter, all right, there are tracks that go up, all right, that do sensory stuff. So if you're going up, it's because you want to tell the brain something. No offense, but your brain, it doesn't know all that much. It has to be told. Your brain has never tasted lasagna. Your brain has never seen your best friend. Your brain has heard nothing. So information has to get to it. So when you see axons going up, they are sensory telling the brain, hey, your hand is on a hot stove. Hey, you just stubbed your toe, because your brain wouldn't know. It's in this bony box. All right. And notice there's different things going up. Touch is in the red and yellow. All right. So touch from your leg is in the yellow, touch from your arm is in the red, pain and temperature are in the green, and your ability to know where your body parts are even when you close your eyes, like even if you close your eyes. So if I said, everyone close your eyes on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, go, close your eyes, I can tell if you're doing it. All right. Question, is anyone giving me the finger? Open your eyes. All right. Well, how would you know? If your eyes are closed, like your answer could be like, I might be, I don't know. But like, you're like, you knew whether you were or not. That's because of these blue pathways telling you where your arms are, where your legs are, even when your eyes are closed. So there's different sensory stuff going up, and there are different commands going down. You have voluntary commands. So if I want to turn my neck, I can. If someone slams the door, I might do that. That wasn't a voluntary command, that was a reflex. So the involuntary would be going down the green paths, the voluntary would be going down the pink. So here we are in the spinal cord, not yet at the brain, but here we see organization. You have gray matter, you have white matter, and the gray matter is organized, sensory over here, motor over here. The white matter is organized. You got ascending paths, descending paths, all different kinds. Now, the spinal cord very often does what we call reflexes. The brain does reflexes too, all right? But if I touch put my hand on the hot stove, what to do next isn't a complicated thing. It's not like, deciding who in the room you're going to invite to the party that you're having your weekend and this weekend and the cookout. Like, that's hard. Like, based on what happened last time, who do I invite this time? Whereas here, just pull your hand off the hot stove. That's easy. So reflexes are simple decisions that the spinal cord can make or the lower parts of the brain can make. And typically what happens is we bring sensory information into the spinal cord. It decides that's the response we want. And then a motor command goes out from the spinal cord to a muscle. So the brain can do this. Some of these you're born with, some of these you learn, like walking involves reflexes, swimming involves reflexes, driving a car involves reflexes. So these are in general the ones which we do not have conscious control over. Did you have a question?
Yeah, if all the signals have to go through the spinal cord and up to the brain, or if you're saying that there are tracks that go to the spinal cord and the message goes back without having to go all the way up to the brain.
So there's 2 parts to your question. Let me answer both. Not everything that gets to the spinal cord has to go to the brain. So if I touch a hot stove, the hand is already coming off by the time the brain realized that I touched it, all right? Because the spinal cord said, here, let me take care of this. I'll do this. For example, my digesting my meal, my brain has no idea what's going on with my intestines. Actually, the intestines are working that out mostly. So not everything has to go up to the brain, so the spinal cord can do that. But not everything has to go through the spinal cord. So if like something comes to my eye and like I blink, all right, that was a reflex that the brain did, because it would waste my time to send the message all the way down here, only to send it all the way back up. So the messages which come to the spinal cord don't have to go all the way up, but then the brain can do a lot of reflexes on its own because we've got ears and eyes and touch here. They can just go right in the brain and never hit the spinal cord. Okay. Yeah, you have a question?
The process for reflexes, is that slow as one ages?
So good question. We like, when we're dealing with the most complex structure in the known universe, it would be nice to just say reflexes as if that means something, or learning and memory as if that means something. But the reality is, we're talking about a whole lot of different things. So like this reflex where I'm pulling this away, the reflex which allows me to track something with my eye, like the first one was very simple. Second one, much more complex. This one's happening in spinal cord, this one's. So there will come a point where I can't say anything that's true of all reflexes. If you don't mind, I think this might illustrate the same point that I'm trying to make a little bit better. But like with memory, let's say I have amnesia. All right, so I have an accident, I have amnesia. Does that affect all memory? Well, let's say I go to my doctor, my neurologist. My neurologist has to introduce herself, himself to me every single time because I can't remember their name. I can't form new memories. And so say, hey, this is my name. But if my neurologist says, you know what? You're such a great patient, such a nice day. Let's go golfing. I'm not a golfer. I don't golf. But if my neurologist does this every day, my golf game gets better, but I don't remember their name. So we talk about memory. I have amnesia. I've lost my memory, but it becomes, obvious. There's different kinds of memory. I can learn how to play golf, but I can't remember your name. So with that, with reflexes, if I have a stroke that affects my visual cortex, or my midbrain, like that would affect visual reflexes, but pain reflexes would be fine, right? Because that's going in here. So like these are nice little words to come up with, but in this very complex thing, if something's going on up here, you could have this affected, but not, affect every reflex in your body. Getting to the brain, the most complex structure in the known universe. First thing we do is split it into 6 regions. All right. This aqua one is the biggest, so we should talk about that one last, your cerebrum. All right. So let's just make that go away for a second. All right. So cerebrum, go away. Okay. I swear. The cerebellum in the back of your head is about the size of an apple. Second biggest one. And then we have this green one, which we'll get to presently. And then the 3 smallest are what we call the brainstem. All right. So red, we have the medulla oblongata. Blue, we have the pons, and orange, we have the midbrain. All right, I'm just going to try to whiz through those. These first 3 regions, we often just call them collectively as the brainstem. If you were to look at them, and I've got lots of pictures I can pull up. So, you know what? Why not see the pictures too? I'm sorry, we started some really good conversations earlier and I got distracted. Getting back to the gray and the white matter, you'll see that the brainstem is white. All right, it's white matter, which means it's mostly axons, wires going back and forth between the 2 biggest regions. So just like the spinal cord was organized, the brain is organized too. So yeah, so this is kind of whiter, all right? But if we were to look then at the cerebrum and the cerebellum, notice how they're grayer. So white matter versus gray matter. And if you ask why the colors, well, once again, the wires, the axons, they are the ones giving the white matter. So this is where messages are going through the smallest regions of the brain and then going to the 2 biggest in aqua and purple. So there's all of this talking going back and forth. So for the most part, the brainstem is transmitting messages back and forth. That being said, all right, there are soma there, which are making decisions. All right, so the medulla, yes, it passes all of this information between your body and the 2 biggest parts of your brain, but it's determining what your heart rate should be. It's determining what your blood pressure should be. It's, will control vomiting, swallowing, hiccuping. So it controls your breathing rate. So it does stuff. And that's why, like, I don't know if you've ever seen a movie and all of a sudden someone gets struck in the back of the head and then they're done. All right. You don't want to strike the back of your head because here's the part of the brain that's controlling heart rate and breathing and really important stuff. All right. It is all involuntary. All right. So it's going to be a while before I mention anything that you have a conscious awareness of or conscious control over. All right. So I don't control the stuff, nor would I want to. Right? If every single second you're like, oh, wait, take a breath. Oh, I almost forgot. Oh, heartbeat. Blood pressure, be a little higher. Oh, send blood to, my arm and not to my digestive tract. If you had to keep track of all of that, it'd be exhausting. All right. I'm glad that all of this is going on without my awareness. All right. So the medulla, mostly fibers going back and forth, but it does some stuff. Same thing with the pons, part number 2. It bulges out, and it bulges in mammals more than anybody else. It bulges in primates more than most mammals, and it bulges in humans a lot, because this is the traffic jam between the two biggest parts of the brain. So aqua and purple, where do they meet? Where's the, like, all the wires going back and forth here? So we get this bulge, mostly sorting out messages going back and forth between the two biggest parts of your brain. But this does affect breathing. There are some cranial nerves which come from there. Same thing with the midbrain. This is the smallest region, mostly wires going back and forth, but you do vision stuff here, you do hearing stuff there, and you do muscle stuff here. Now, let me just take a second, because like, maybe you don't care, all right? And that's fine. You want to talk about the conscious parts of your brain, and I get that, all right? But let me just give a little shout out to the unconscious parts. Let's say that I have a stroke, all right, and it affects my ability to move this side of my face. And if you say, smile for the camera, I do this. I can't move this side. And you say, oh, smile for the camera, and I do this. And then you tell me a very funny joke. I might do this. Ha, 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 ha. And then you say, oh, that's great. Now do that again. Smile for the camera. And I do this. Why? Well, because the laughter, that was involuntary. All right, what I do. So it turns out the brain's a big place. So where I give commands to voluntarily smile for the camera, that's over here. And where I have the coordination for, like, how do I respond to a joke that's funny, that's over here. And if I have a stroke, I can damage one and not the other. So in that case, the involuntary messages, they were fine. It was the voluntary that I had control over. So here, you're not aware of these. The superior colliculus, which does vision stuff, the inferior colliculus, which does hearing stuff. But there are reflexes. So for example, like something coming to your eye, you blink, all right? If you're following something with your eyes, like your eyes track it as it moves, you can judge distance. All right, these are not voluntary things, these are involuntary. So if I had a stroke here, I would say there's something I'm consciously aware of in my visual field. Like maybe I can't see color anymore, maybe I can't see out of this eye anymore, like I'm aware of that. This I'm not aware of, but I still use it. Just because I'm not aware of it doesn't mean it's important. All right, these reflexes are contributing to my sense of vision. So if you had a stroke here, it would have an effect. This would affect hearing. Let me just mention this a little bit. If I had Parkinson's, all right, and if someone said, could you please reach out and grab that cup? I could reach out and grab the cup, but it wouldn't look like that. It would look like this. Why? Because the voluntary is fine. Look at me, I'm reaching out and grabbing the cup. But the involuntary tremors, that means it's not the voluntary motor areas which are damaged, it's the involuntary ones like those. So once again, we often don't think about the involuntary parts of our brain because we're not consciously aware of them, but nevertheless, they're doing stuff. And then there can be injuries which damage those, and we do notice the effects of those. Okay. So those three areas together, we tend to call the brainstem, all right? And there's all of, this stuff. So for example, serotonin, it's an important message. It affects like anxiety, it affects, depression, it affects a whole bunch of things. And there are only a couple of areas which make serotonin and then ship it everywhere else throughout the brain. So like the midbrain and this next part that I'm going to mention, we can talk about how serotonin is affecting my mood up here, but it's actually being made down here. All right, so these are not the parts of the brain we talk about all the time, but they have roles. Okay. Wow. Okay, got a lot of midbrain. Okay. The green area, it's easy not to give it its due, because when you cut a brain like halfway in the middle here, it looks smaller than it otherwise would because there's these two big bulges that go out laterally. So it's actually bigger than this, but you're just looking through its smallest section. So like here's like a slightly bigger section. The thalamus is the biggest part. All right. Underneath it, we have the hypothalamus, and behind it, we have the pineal gland. So those three parts are all in the green. Okay. So, all right, we'll do these one by one. All right, so here's a human brain. So that would mostly be thalamus. Here's a hypothalamus, and there's the pineal gland in the back. So they do stuff. And in fact, I know this seems insane, all right? But if we were to talk about the thalamus, we would split it up into this. Like here's we'll name this part, each of the colors, because they're all doing different things. Some of those are doing sensory things. Some of those are doing motor things. Some are helping them with some of my emotions, etc. So if I had a stroke which affected the thalamus here, all right, what would it do? Well, that depends. Well, what area of the thalamus did you impact? All right, because each of these then does something something different. And it's important to remember that like the thalamus is the biggest part of the brain. Almost all of most of its information goes through the thalamus first. All right, so coming up the spinal cord or senses, all right, everything except for smell goes through the thalamus, then the cerebrum. And if the cerebrum then wants to talk, this part of the cerebrum wants to talk to that part, the message goes here to the thalamus and then to the other part. So, each of these areas, they're doing their own thinking, but then the wires connecting them, so all of these brain parts, they're certainly important. Underneath the thalamus is the hypothalamus, and we just do not have enough time to talk about that. The hypothalamus, it's the size of a thumbnail, all right, but it's deciding whether you're hungry or thirsty. It's deciding whether what your body temperature should be. It's deciding whether you're angry. You have a major pleasure center there. There are areas which differ between genders in animals, but also then in humans, and respond to hormones. It makes a whole bunch of hormones on its own. In other words, it's the size of a thumbnail, but I would argue nowhere else in your body have you squeezed as many vital functions into an area as small as your hypothalamus. All right, so really, really interesting stuff there. One thing, I'm just going to show it to you now. I could find it, but I'm trying to, if something would take me 30 seconds to find it, that's 30 seconds we don't have. So there can be like a little bridge in between these two lobes of the thalamus. All right, most of you have it. All right, not all of you do. And if you have it, some people it's bigger than others. It varies a little bit with gender. So in other words, women are more likely to have this bridge than men. All right, and it's more likely to be a little larger in women. Now, the human brain is pretty much the human brain in everybody. But there are some small areas where you can see, ooh, this nucleus in the hypothalamus, a little bit bigger in women. This nucleus in the hypothalamus, a little bit bigger in men. This corpus callosum here, a little bit bigger in women, slightly different shaped. All right. So just like estrogen and testosterone go to body tissues and cause changes, all right? Testosterone causes hair to grow, here on the face. Estrogen changes the shape of the pelvis. So these hormones, they go to different tissues, they make changes. They go to the brain, all right? The brain makes receptors for them, not everywhere. Specific places like the hypothalamus says, I'm going to make an estrogen receptor. So when estrogen's in the blood, I want to know and I'll change as a result. I'm going to make a testosterone receptor. In fact, the brain actually makes some of its own steroid hormones like estrogen and testosterone called neurosteroids, all right? So just, we vary a little bit because of that. Right, the pineal gland, which, usually I put in the other. All right, I'll open one more thing. That makes melatonin at night. All right, so melatonin, which helps us sleep, can be called the hormone of the dark. And that is the third part of that green region, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the pineal gland. Now, sleep is good for you. Like if you're not sleeping enough, like we start to worry about that, but that's like a bit of an issue. And one of the reasons is that the melatonin that the pituitary, that the pineal gland makes, it's helping prevent cancer. It's helping your immune systems develop. So while, we think of like the nervous system being over here and the hormone making endocrine system being over here, the hypothalamus makes hormones. It's part of the brain and it's part of the endocrine system. The pineal gland, all right, here is part of the brain, but it's making melatonin at night when you sleep, part of the endocrine system. All right, so there's overlap between those two. Okay. Where are we? We're here. So I kind of talked about, oh, okay, I'm sorry, before I finish that sentence, let me just go here. There is a part of my brain that does this, all right? So that's its job. Do this with your hand. And if I have a stroke, it affects how well I can do this. There are other things the brain does, like anger and joy and fear, all right? Those aren't accidents, all right? The brain, different parts of the brain have jobs, right? Like the amygdala does fear, all right? Fear is a good thing. There are things that you should be afraid of, all right? And when you see those, you should act on this fear. That's healthy. If you weren't afraid of these things, you would live less time, all right? So these emotions are controlled by different parts of the brain. Now, collectively, I don't know if you're in the mood for this, but like we put them all together. And if you think about your emotions, are you in control of your anger? Well, kind of, like you have some control, all right? But you're not 100% in control because something can happen and I just got so angry, I'm sorry. Are you in control of your hunger? A little bit. You could say, oh, we got like, another, 25 minutes or so. So like, I'll not think about dinner until I get home. But hunger just comes up on you. Thirst just comes up on you. So there are these things called emotions and drives. We have some voluntary control, but there's also some involuntary control. It's kind of like a limbus between the two. Anatomically, what parts of the brain control them? Well, the involuntary stuff is down here. The voluntary stuff is up here. Notice this also in the middle. So in the middle between your voluntary self, your conscious self, and your involuntary reflexive self are these areas that are kind of a limbus in the middle. We call them the limbic system. And these are the areas which are affecting emotions and drives. They also do a lot of memory, all right? Which makes sense because what do you remember? You remember the things that scare you. You remember the things you hate. You remember the things you love. If you're bored to tears in this lecture or any other, you're not going to remember anything because you've just told your brain, this isn't worth remembering. So places like the amygdala and hippocampus, not only are they doing emotions, but they're also doing memory, all right? They're helping you encode memory. So the things that emotionally matter to you, you're likely to remember. The things that don't emotionally matter to you, probably going to forget, in part because it was the emotion parts of the brain which were doing the memory coding, all right, conferring short-term memory into long-term memory. So we call these areas the limbic system, all right? Now, a little bit of an aside in that there are two parts of the brain left, but since they're the biggest, let's just kind of start weaving our way toward them as best we could. If, all right, you don't have to do this, and at home you don't have to do this, but what I tell my class at this point is like, everyone just take a second, look at someone near you and punch them. So whether or not you act on that, there you go, okay. So you have to, so if you did, your brain wants to know that you've been touched, and maybe if it was hard enough, I mean, that looked a little, there might be pain. So the question is, how does your brain get told someone just punched me, all right? Well, there would be different pathways. Touch travels up one way, all right? So there's neuron number 1 that actually goes all the way up the spinal cord to the medulla, where we touch neuron number 2 before it goes to neuron number 3 in the thalamus. Pain would actually go up a different way, all right? So neuron number 1 ends here, and then neuron number 2 in orange is a little bit longer, all right? So I mentioned that there are different parts of the spinal cord. These would be different routes there. And those two songs, like one was about how do you feel pain, and if you touch me, that was kind of like how these end up going up. Interestingly, the orange neurons cross to the opposite side of the body. So this half of my brain is feeling this half of my body. If I have a stroke here, all right, I know what you just put in this hand. I cannot feel this hand, because this half of the brain is processing here. When we talk about motor commands in a second, same thing. If I have a stroke here, I can move this part just fine. I can't move this arm anymore. So these orange neurons are crossing over to the opposite side of the body. So the right half of my brain is feeling and moving the left half. Every now and then someone asks, why would that be? And there's two answers. One of them is no one has any idea. So if you want to go with that. The second answer is Before there were vertebrates, there were vertebrate relative wormy little things called chordates, and they have a very important reflex. So if I'm this little wormy chordate and you stab me here, like you take a little pin and you stab me here, where do I want my muscle contractions? Not on the side that I've been stabbed, because now if this part contracts, I'm moving to the thing that's stabbing me. I want the muscles to cross over and now contract over here, in which case I'm moving away. So there's this big important reflex in this little tiny wormy thing that has barely a brain, where things cross over to the opposite side. And then if you don't like, no one has any idea, then the only idea other than that is if the ancestors of vertebrates with their very simple brains had this thing of crossing over, that as brains got bigger and more complex, they just kind of built on the foundation which was already there. So you can take whichever one of the two answers you prefer. So then this gets to my cerebrum, all right? So my cerebrum, the biggest part of the brain, has all these folds. I'll mention them presently. But there's a section here and a section here. Here is a sensory map of my body. So that in red here, I've got a little map of my body. And if I have electrical activity there, I say, aha, electrical activity there, something just touched my cheek. If I have electrical activity here, I say, ooh, something just touched my side. Electrical activity here is like, ooh, something's touching my leg. So this is a map of me. And my brain knows where I was touched based on where on the map the messages get relayed. Okay. Now, my map looks a little weird. My face is really big on my map, like there's a big area. But I'm also very sensitive here. Like if you touch my lips or you touch my cheek, I know exactly where you touched. If you touch my back, I'm like, kind of over there. No, like I'm good at identifying stimuli here and here. Not so good on my back or my calf. And if you look here, like the map that's created, your face is really big, your fingertips are really big. So we have a map of the body. The thalamus has a role in that the thalamus figures what is worth paying attention to. So you have all of this stimulus going up your spinal cord. Your thalamus is only going to pass on to the cerebrum the most important things you focus your attention on. So right now you can feel your shoe. Can you feel your left shoe? You can feel your left shoe. A minute ago you didn't. Why? Because your thalamus says that's not important. Don't pass that on to the cerebrum. The cerebrum has other things more important things to worry about, like, the presentation going on. All right. So, all of these parts are working together. And just as we have a map here of the sensory parts of our body, then we have a motor map in front of it. So if this is a map, all right, and where you stimulate this, I say, oh, I just felt something touch my cheek. I just felt something touch my shoulder. You move in front of it, I have another map. And now if there's electrical activity here, I start moving my hand. Here I feel my hand. Here I'm moving my hand. All right, here I feel my shoulder. Here I'm moving my shoulder. So the way that you give commands to your body when you're dancing, when this class is over, all right, is, here's the hand area. So if you say, electrical stimuli here, there's a command going out to your hand. Electrical stimuli over here, your leg, your cheek, etc. Okay, so we have a motor map, just like we have a sensory map. Okay. Now, your biggest part of your brain, all right, the cerebrum, it says, take a step, or dance, or swim, or whatever, or when you tried to learn how to drive a car, put your foot on the brake. How did that go the first time you put your foot on the brake? Are you proud of that? Okay. No, you probably use too much force. So here's where the second largest part of your brain comes in. Your second largest part of the brain, it does a lot. But the main thing it does is make sure your motor movements are just the way you want. Because a lot of times if the cerebrum was the only voice, they would be jerky, you would be moving with too much force. So you slammed on the brake the first time. If you watch a baby try to walk, it takes a step and whoa! All right. So it's this cerebellum here, which is going to try to memorize complex motor patterns, cut down the muscles that you use only to those necessary so that you have a smooth movement. In the cerebellum and in the cerebrum, here in this section of a human brain, the white matter has been stained black. So notice that the white matter is deep, it's inside, whereas the gray matter is in two places. Most of it is on the outside, which is why it's so highly folded. If the gray matter is where the cells are that are actually doing the thinking, the more gray matter you have, the more thinking you can do. So you make this really highly folded. Look, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. So most of the gray matter is here, but there's also a little bit deep inside as well. So if we look here, here's the white matter inside, all right? And the gray matter, look, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. So that gives us a lot of different capabilities given how many cells we have here. So if we're walking with smooth motions, the cerebrum alone isn't responsible for that. It's the cerebellum making, guiding the motions, which has a lot to do with it. And so like if you hurt your cerebellum, you would have a lot of trouble with your balance. The cerebellum is a major place for balance, with jerky movements. Etc. And you also have maps of your body here, all right? So that like, where your balance is, and like if you close your eyes, you could still walk out the door, all right? Because, even with your eyes closed, where your body parts are, and your cerebellum with these maps would have a big role in that. Okay. So let me just get to a picture. So the cerebrum is the last part of the brain, which we haven't really discussed. That's kind of be the peach part here. This is the largest part of the brain, and it is also very highly folded. All right, so you look here, very highly folded, because once again, where is the gray matter? It's mostly in the outside. There is a little bit deep inside, but most of the inside is white matter. The gray matter that you're actually thinking with is on the outside. That's why your brain is so highly folded, right? That makes you smarter, right? And I don't mean to be insulting with what I'm about to say, but smart. But alligators, they can be big. They can have a big brain. A mouse is smarter than an alligator. So like the alligator's brain is bigger than the whole mouse. So how is the mouse smarter? Well, it's not size of the brain, it's how many cells you have. All right. And if you have a small brain, you can still make it go up and down and up and down and up and down and have far more cells and thus far more complex interactions than a reptile would, which has a smooth brain. So if you look at a reptile's brain, a fish's brain, it's just smooth. As we mammals, we're very smart because we, increase all of the gray matter on the outside, which is where the thinking is going, by all of these folds. So some of these folds are big and get names, all right? But and there's this big band of fibers which connects them, is called the corpus callosum. So I've got two halves of my cerebrum, but they talk to each other, all right? So if and I'll say this in a second, forgive me, I always have to think about this. So if the left half of my brain is going to be the one that's talking and planning speech, what's in my left hand is actually crossing over to the right side of my brain. So how do I know what to describe? If you put something in my hand, how can I talk about that? Because what's in my left hand goes here, but this is the part that's doing the talking. Well, they cross through this big highway called a corpus callosum. If that's ever damaged, or rarely in a surgery it has to be cut, then the two halves of your brain, they don't talk to each other. All right, so I kind of know what's in my left hand. Like if I put it in a box, I can feel it and pick it out again. But if you ask me to describe it with words, I can't. All right, because the message would have to go from here to here, and that would cross here. Once again, slight gender difference in this. Corpus callosum tends to be a little bit bigger in women. All right. I'm just going to zip through this because, once again, most complex structure in the known universe. All of these parts do stuff. I mean, it's organized. It's not like just stuff is happening. Here is the motor map of the body. All right. So once again, if you have activity here, you're doing this. In front of that is where I would say learn to type. All right. So everybody can do this. All right. But this isn't typing. All right. So typing, you had to learn, okay, H is here and M is here, is whatever. Maybe I had a typing class. I don't know if that's still a thing anymore. Probably like phones now. I don't know. I don't know. I don't care. But privilege of being old. But that would go on in this premotor area, like trying this. Now, if I had a stroke here and these cells died, I couldn't move my hand. If someone said move my hand, I can't voluntarily because I damaged that area. If I had a stroke here, I could move my hand, but I can't type anymore. I could maybe learn it again, all right, but I would have lost the ability. So once again, everything is doing a different task. This area is what's called the motor speech center, and it's only on the left side. This is where you give commands to the muscles of your throat, your pharynx, and your lips to make the sound or b sound or sound. Like we had to learn this when we were kids. Like every culture, uses different, vowels. So like if you ever go to a country other than the one where you were raised, you might struggle with the language and people might notice you speak with an accent, right? You don't speak like the people who were born there, because people who were born there, they, practice all of the vowels here. I lived in South America for a bit, and they use a whole lot of vowels like all right, so Baiteko, Ibona, Hyundai, and just things that and I don't speak like a native, like some of these vowels here. So this is where we learned how to make your vocal tract make these sounds. If you had a stroke here, you would lose the ability to talk. And when I say stroke, obviously you can have little strokes that affect a little part of the area. You could have big strokes. So, that would impact. But you would no longer be able to send those commands to muscle. You would still understand speech, all right, but you just couldn't say make the M sound or make the B sound, all right? So those are some areas of the brain. Let's hit some others. So here is where I would feel touch and pain from all over my body, like my elbow, my hip, my side, etc. All right, so I say, something just touched me, or something hurts. Now, in addition to this map, we also have what are called association areas, all right? Because it's one thing to say, I'm sorry, there's nothing good here. Well, maybe this. All right, it's either this or this thing. So it's one thing to say, I have something in my hand. And it's another thing to say, oh, it's a paperclip. It's a soda can, all right? So it's one thing to get the raw data in, all right? It's about this size, about this weight, about this temperature, etc. It's another thing to say, oh, it's a soda can. It's a paperclip. This is giving the raw data. This is putting it all together and say, oh, I know what that is. And that happens a lot of places. Oh, and before I go on, I'm sorry. If I had a stroke here, I couldn't feel my hand. If I had a stroke here, I could feel my hand. I just wouldn't know what it was. I wouldn't know it was a soda can or a tennis ball, all right, because this is what that part of the brain is doing. This is where I do hearing. And the raw data comes in here. If I have a stroke here, I can't hear anymore. If I have a stroke in the blue area, I can hear, I know it's a voice, but it could be either someone I've never met or it could be my best friend. I can't tell their voices apart. I can tell them apart to look at them, but I can't tell their voices. It's either a dog barking or a fire engine. I have trouble with those two, all right? Same thing over here. There is a place where the raw data comes in for vision, and then there's an association area which interprets it. If you get the raw data area, I can't see. So if it's big enough, I close one eye, I'm like, yeah, I can't see, all right? If I affect the yellow area, there's a green area right back there. Sorry, you can't see. But if I affect then the yellow area, I can see, but now I know my best friend's voice. I know my brother's voice. But now I look at their face and I can't tell them apart. I know their voice. I don't know their face anymore because I've lost this area. So that was like the visual association area. Two more areas, then we'll kind of start to wind down. There's a lot of different areas, but at a certain point, you kind of have to start pulling things together, right? So the examples that I use in my classes, like if you go to lab and your leg catches fire, how would you know that? Because the visual area is saying, ooh, I see orange flickery things, all right? The olfactory area is like, ooh, I'm smelling smoke, all right? The auditory areas are saying, ooh, I hear my lab partner laughing at me, or whatever. So you have to put all of these together for the idea like, oh, my leg is on fire. So that means that this part has to talk to this part, which has to talk to the pain over here. So a lot of that's going on over here. So if someone were to say, sit here, and you sat down, that's good. That means this part is working. If you had a stroke that affected this area, you might say, ooh, sit, not stand, sit. Got it. Here, not there, here. Got it. But not put them together to understand that was a command to sit here. So strokes here can be really bad because someone can understand every single word you say and not have a single idea what you're talking about. Now, I apologize. I'm going to enjoy this for a second because you get me. All right. My students don't. So if I were to say, does everyone remember One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? Yes, that's not the reaction I often get. But in any case, at the end, there is a frontal lobotomy scene. And once again, my students, they don't get the joke. I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy. You get the joke. My students don't get the joke. This is right here, one of the most profoundly important parts of our brain. Much of our personality is located here. Your ability to tell the difference between past, present, and future is here. What's socially acceptable? A lot of that is located here. In a frontal lobotomy, you separate the prefrontal cortex from the rest of the brain. In the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, this treats someone's anger. And as a result of this, they are not angry or violent anymore. Well, no one would be if you no longer have an idea of past, present, or future. Like, if I had no sense of past, present, or future, I wouldn't care about anything. All right. I wouldn't care where I went to the bathroom. Like, there are no consequences to things. So at the end of that movie, the person is not violent, but they are also not there. Much of their personality just isn't there because a lot of it was located in this part of the brain. You prevented it from talking to other parts. Now, if I were to just maybe add like one or two more things, because we could start talking about senses and because like the brain is so complicated, it's all right. It's complicated. So I have a couple of videos where I have a bunch of cartoon characters act out different things or say, this is my problem. My students have to guess what part of the brain has been damaged. And so you see, like, all of these are involving motor control, but they're all different areas. All right. So a lot of the parts of the brain are working together. But if you had a stroke, you know, a stroke in a specific area would affect a specific thing. Oh, where do I talk about, I guess, aggressions over here? Now, personality. I kind of hinted at it earlier. Let me just say a kind of thing. Let's just pick one. Let's talk about aggression. What causes aggression? Why would someone be more aggressive than others? All right. Are there any biological factors which would contribute? And the answer is yeah. All right. So in these cartoons, each of these has a biological reason for being more aggressive. All right, so they got to have a mutation in the monoamine oxidase gene I talked about, mutations in nitric oxide synthase. Interestingly, this one and this one, in both of them, in both mice and humans, this will make males violent, but not females if you have a mutation in this gene that makes the gene not work. But all of these, like low FSH, low prolactin, high epinephrine, high adrenal androgens, all of these are biological reasons which would make one more aggressive. But then again, the environment can do that. All right, so how we are raised, our experiences, etc. So lead, if we're exposed to lead in groundwater, that's going to affect violence. That's why it was banned in the 70s from our gasoline. It's a neurotoxin which affects aggression, and every car was spewing it out. Now, we vary. And so if you were to say something like video games increase, aggression, for example, that's not true, but it's not false either. All right, because we vary. All right, violence in video games would, in some people, based on other aspects of their biology or other aspects of their environment, that would potentially affect aggression in them, but in other people, not so much. So something like this is complicated, just like heart disease. What causes heart disease? Well, this person's heart disease was caused by these factors. This person's heart disease caused by these factors. Heart disease shares some symptoms, but it's not like this one disorder that everyone experiences the same way. All right, and the same thing here, whether it be aggression or any other thing. So just with autism, do we know of genes which affect autism susceptibility? We do, a lot of them. So each of these affects autism susceptibility, but none of them seem to be the main one. So then the question is, well, then is it an environmental thing like mercury or certain medications which can be taken during pregnancy, which are the risk? So the brain is the most complex structure in the known universe, but we are not just instinctual like a jellyfish would be. Obviously, our upbringing matters, the environment matters. So, if you were to ask a question about personality or behavior, a whole host of genes is involved with neurotransmitter synthesis, but then a whole host of environmental factors. It matters how you were raised. It matters whether you were exposed to lead. It matters whether your mother was bitten by a mosquito that carried the Zika virus that caused your brain to be about the size of a chimpanzee's brain when you were born. All right, so it's not just genes which matter in the formation of the nervous system, but all of these other things. Now, I'll wrap up in a second. Obviously, I try to do as good a job as I could, and things we left out. So, for example, I'm sorry if no one has ever told you this before. You have holes in your brain. Sorry to be the one. All right. Look at the spaces, and fluid goes through those, which we call cerebrospinal fluid. It helps to float the brain. It helps to keep the brain's environment the same. And so we worry about pressure in the brain. So if you were to bang your head, the buildup of fluid might crush nerve cells, and so that would be an issue. So these are spaces through which a fluid runs. Okay, so this was just an introduction into the most complex structure in the known universe, but also the most important to us. Like, my hand is important to me, but not as important as this. I would still be me without this, but not. If I bang this on the way home, I'm a different person potentially afterwards. So I hope this was an interesting introduction into this. We do have a fall semester with students rapidly approaching. There was a message that came out on the email that said 2 weeks away. So in 2 weeks, we will start our fall series, which will be kind of a repeat of what I did last year about the birds of Orange County, just kind of, just birds in general and all the different birds and the issues affecting them week by week, taking a different group. That will start in 2 weeks. But next week, we will do the last installment of this short anatomy series, where we'll just hit a couple of body systems and say, all right, just basics about the respiratory system, mention asthma, basics about the digestive system, mention diabetes, et cetera, and just see how far we go. All right, so happy to answer any questions, but I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Hope to see you next week. If you have any questions, feel free to say. Otherwise, thank you for coming. Yes?
Opinion on effects of ethanol on brain cells.
Ethanol is a tough one. All right, so ethanol is tough. All right, this is why. All of the other things. So something that affects serotonin, that looks like serotonin, it's a drug like cocaine or amphetamines or whatever. They have effects in this part of the brain. Whatever part of the brain uses serotonin, that's where that drug is having an effect. Ethanol, what it does is it goes into the cell membranes of every cell and affects their fluidity. And thus it affects how electrical currents flow over. So while this drug or that drug is affecting this part of the brain or that part of it, alcohol affects the brain, which is why it has so many different effects. Ooh, my inhibitions are less. I'm more likely to dance on the table. Oh, but I'm also now going to be more forgetful. I might get angrier. It's affecting the whole brain. So because of that, it would be having lots of effects simultaneously.
Destruction of neurons.
Eventually, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
What part of the brain causes Alzheimer's and dementia?
I have some videos on that. Essentially, there's a couple different genes involved, but the main thing is we make these proteins and we would like to break them down. All right, because it's garbage. Like when you're done, you break them down. All right. If, however, you've got certain mutations in genes like presenilin 1, presenilin 2, apolipoprotein E4 does it too, but through a different mechanism. Now, all of a sudden, you can't break it down. And now as you age, your brain tissue just has tangles of these protein fibers that should have been broken down. And that's now just going to start these inflammatory responses. And now just overall mass will increase. So if you were to look at the size, the volume of a person without volume, Alzheimer's, this now starts to go down. But the main cause is you just start to develop proteins that should be broken down, and garbage that should be thrown away is not. And it just collects and interferes. Yep.
You're saying the brain has dealt with.
So it's a protein called presenilin 1 and 2. And if you have a certain mutation, you just don't break it down. So these fibers end up forming tangles, which just interfere with the function of the brain. Anybody else? Yeah.
Why is it that we have these inability to recall a person's name? Princess Leia in Star Wars.
Yeah.
I can't think of her name. I can't think of her name. And someday.
But you know she was Princess Leia. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
What's that?
Well, so in fairness, there's a sorry, I've been the woman from Taxi. What was the woman? She had red hair. She was in the show Taxi. Well, that actress. Anyway, there is a disorder where you don't forget anything, and she has that. So yeah, so she just remembers everything. But Mary, thank you. But it's difficult. You do want to forget things because some things aren't important. Like if you could remember everything, then how do you like have space for the new important memories if you're remembering this? So forgive me. All right, I don't know you, but I'm gonna. So you remembered she was Princess Leia because that was important. That mattered to me because the Empire was being defeated. But the name of the actress, not as important. So you remember the important part, but at the end of the day, you said like I'm not going to like remember each aspect of it. I'm just going to remember the important part. So we do that all the. So like if I walk up to you and say, hey, my name is this, you'll forget my name. If I go to shake your hand and I fall into you and knock you down, you'll remember my name. But it's just, once again, the memories, they're using emotions and drive. So yeah.
Just in response to that, on like a real trigger can be anxiety.
Mhm.
Like I found,
Mhm.
like I know this person forever, but I have to tell my boss her name.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think of it, and I can't.
Mhm.
It's weird. Well, the question is too, but I just don't understand the mechanism when you're talking about the neurotransmitters,
Mhm.
dopamine and such. So I understand in addiction that you cause the stimulation, that's the right word, so many times and it falls back or whatever, that it can't sustain the ability to re-regulate. How does that antipsychotic regulate the let's just say dopamine?
Yeah.
I don't know which one it was, but and not have that happen? Does that make sense?
It does. So all of these different drugs, they work differently, but I think just pull this up. So there are chemicals. So if I wanted to tell a muscle what to do, I say, I want to tell muscle contract. I use something called acetylcholine. I have to make it, I have to perceive it. But it turns out botulinum poison, which causes food poisoning, blocks acetylcholine release. Barbiturates decrease it. Insecticides and nerve gas, whether it be the nerve gas used in World War I, the very first one, or you might actually remember there was a day in the 80s where everybody woke up and it turned out that our country in the middle of the night just sent planes to bomb 2 factories in 2 different countries without letting anybody know. And we said, because they were making this. The message being, anyone in the world makes this, we feel so strongly about this that we will make this. So things can interact with a neurotransmitter, prevent its binding, prevent it from being broken down. That's just acetylcholine. Now, as you mentioned, there's all of these other drugs, antipsychotics. So now if we were to create this big list. Now, some of these look like these, all right? Some of them keep them there. So for example, let's say that I take cocaine, all right? I potentially feel great because I've got things acting at my pleasure center and cocaine is keeping them active. But then there's long-term side effects because if my brain just says pleasure, 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 I'm going to start making less of the neurotransmitters which cause pleasure because my brain thinks I have enough. So it will now get harder and harder for me to feel pleasure without cocaine. All right. So here, if these signals are molecules, you have things that look like them. You have things that can bind their receptors and aren't them. You have things that can block them. And so then pharmaceuticals can say like, oh, like if your problem is making too much or not making enough or whatever, how can we If you're not reabsorbing enough serotonin, then that's a factor of your depression and maybe even attempted suicide. This medication will promote the reuptake of serotonin, boost your serotonin levels. So yeah, there's whole pharmacology classes could be spent on, this drug acts on the enzyme that makes it. This enzyme, blocks the receptor, etc. And I think you had mentioned antipsychotics. I think I have them somewhere here. I meant, yeah, they're in here somewhere. I mentioned antihypertensive. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. They block dopamine receptors, like Thorazine. Anybody else? Well, thank you so very much for coming. Okay, hope you have a wonderful night. Maybe we'll see you next. Oh, and 2 in the chat. Let's just okay, got it. Email for receiving recording. Oh, okay. Thank you. If anyone, I'll try to remember that email just in case I don't. If anyone said, I'd like to see this recording or others, if you were to go to my YouTube channel and go to playlists, all right, you would see, among other things, you would see the summer lecture series, which started off with environmental stuff like the Galapagos Islands, all right, but since then has gotten into blood and blood tests, the human heart, the biology of gender, etc. So just if you went to my YouTube channel at Dr. Jan 41, DRJAHN 41, went to playlists, all of the lectures from this year you would have access to.
So we could see the ones that you did on the 28th and the 4th.
Yes.
And the 7th. Okay.
Yeah, I've recorded all of them.
Okay. Sorry about the background noise.
Oh, no, it's okay.
I'm sitting outside and it's, things going on. So thank you for muting me.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Have a wonderful evening.
You too. Take care.